Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given. Well, hello, everyone. This is Karen W., and on today's show, we have Lundy Bancroft. He is an author, workshop leader, and consultant on domestic abuse and child maltreatment. One of his most famous books, and one of the first books given to me, is Why Does He Do That? His newest book, In Custody, is a novel and thriller. You will not want to put it down, I'm telling you. It tells the story of a mother and daughter that have gone missing and the news reporter that goes undercover to discover an underground system at work to protect the most desperate parent and children from the failings of the family court system. So we are so honored to have you on the podcast and so appreciate your work. And I loved reading about the inspiration for your book, that it was to expose readers to this very important issue in novel form, to make it entertaining and educational all in one. And you certainly accomplished that, as I couldn't put it down. And when I finished it, I felt like I'd watched a movie in my head. I just kept thinking about the story and really thinking about it. I couldn't get it out of my mind. But not only had I been entertained, but I truly was educated about the plight of so many and the need of this to be addressed and hopefully to have change.
Continuing with part 2 of In Custody with Lundy Bancroft.
And there's a new organization called Mothers on the Rise that I encourage people to look into, mothersontherise.org, that its mission is to help women do this kind of county by county, court by court organizing that I really believe, because I've seen so many good ideas over the past 30 years to try to fight for moms' custody rights, or particularly in the last 20 years, great events that have been put on, great marches that have been put on, great pieces of legislation that have been proposed and even passed, and it has not changed the picture. So we've got to get I believe that the only way it's going to change is when we get the numbers up by, we have to have 50 times as many activists as we have now. And most of those activists are going to end up being mothers themselves. I mean, we need to get more allies involved also, both male and female allies, in other words, who aren't in the protective mother position. But it's going to take a really broad-based movement with far, far greater numbers. And I think we can do it if we really put our focus on thinking in that direction.
Yeah, and that's good that you have that resource in your book. So yeah, I'm definitely going to look. I did pull up on their website. So that's the thing. It's so frustrating to hear about how complex it is, and there's just no easy answers, but we got to do something. So even, getting involved in this organization would be something that we could do where you don't feel like you're just powerless over it.
Yes.
So another thing that stood out to me about your book is how greatly this affects not just the mother and the child, but the friends and family when there is a situation so dire that the mom and child or children need to run. And they are put in a position of wanting to help, but being pressured by the police to give any information they may have. So they're pulled in these two different directions, which I could see would just be so tormenting. And the character in your book, Sophia, she has her life turned completely upside down from just being torn in that, being in that position. So I was curious, from your research, is this pretty common, you think?
Yes, it's very common in my experience. I hear so much from the mom's parents who are just in so much pain about how the court is treating her. I often hear from her new boyfriend or her new husband about how much pain he's in, about how the court is treating her. And these people are just in shock because we've all grown up with this notion of the legal system as sort of this system that's working at least somewhat rationally and at least somewhat fairly. And of course, for her parents, also what the court is doing is affecting their relationship with their grandkids. So they're just often that actually doesn't turn up. That particular dynamic doesn't turn up in the novel and In Custody, but I've run into that a lot. And I've had, unfortunately, a fair number of cases where her new boyfriend finally kind of gives up and moves on. Nothing against her, but just can't handle anymore.
Yeah.
The constant pain that she's in from what the court is doing to her. Actually, I started a support group, and I don't run it anymore. It's been taken over by the members. But I started a support group for the new partners. In other words, the men who are in this position, the new non-abusive partners, in other words, of women who were abused in a past relationship. And that was a heavy theme in that group, was how often these women were being really mistreated by the custody courts. And the new boyfriend or husband, he just cannot believe how unhealthy this is for the kids, and just can't believe how his partner is being treated by the courts. And so we were trying to create a support system for those guys.
Yeah. Oh, that's
partly
nice.
So that they wouldn't give up, partly so that they would hang in there, because she needs him to hang in there. She needs the new partner support. But it's also understandable if he can't take it anymore after a while. So,
Yeah.
Our friends or family that, like Sophia and that, in your story.
Yeah, that's great that you see you see needs where no one else really sees that. And I also really appreciated your speaking, the passion that you have for this, you can tell. And as a man, that's so important to women that have been abused. Yeah. And I was abused, so this really just is really impacting me just in a powerful way. I've heard you say that a mom can do everything right and still lose a custody case. It can cost thousands of dollars in lawyer fees to appeal it, and she may not get the protection she needs. A mother would have to seriously consider the pros and cons of fighting the legal battle or run. And this is what I just ran into from this message I just got. How common are the underground networks and their systems?
Well, it's so hard to know, but I would say less and less common, because running has become harder and harder to do. And it's always been really, really hard. But it's gotten harder and harder because government surveillance has gotten more and more intense. We've become a very surveilled society. I'll just speak to the United States. I don't know the condition in other countries. And there's just so many ways to track people down now through these vast databases of fingerprints and face recognition, and the technology makes it harder to hide out than ever. And there's more and more situations now where you're required to show all different kinds of identification to get even basic services. And hiding out has always been really difficult, because you can't even trust your closest friends and relatives. Not that they would betray you on purpose, but they might say something by accident. Mm-hmm. And so when a protective mom, a mom whose children are being abused, decides that she has to flee, they're all deciding that essentially for 20 years, they will never talk to any of the people they most love. And you don't do that unless the alternative is that the abuser is absolutely destroying the children's lives. That they're being, and what happens with some moms is they watch what had been a healthy, happy child turning into a miserable, self-harming, vomiting, etc., like just a psychologically wrecked child, and they think, well, what could they do to me for fleeing that would somehow be worse than this? Well, there is one thing worse than this that they can do to you for fleeing if they catch you, which is they put the children with the perpetrator. So women don't flee much anymore. They never did flee a lot, but they don't flee much anymore. I just had a woman recently get in contact with me who fled successfully and is going to remain living abroad until her children are adults, and actually may really never be able to come back to living in the United States. So the possibility is still out there. As Carrie Green, the journalist character in Custody, discovers, people who help moms flee are typically not at great risk themselves. They tend to be very hard to prosecute for reasons that I go into in the book, In Custody. And so it's not that people are afraid to help. It's just that it's so hard nowadays to figure out where to get to safety and where the abuser won't be able to find you. So it's really a step that mothers don't take until absolutely every possible thing has been tried.
Yeah, to be in that position, I can't even imagine. You would have to be really in dire circumstances, but some of these are. I've heard stories too of this. So, and your book names real life cases where the child or children were killed at the hands of an abuser parent or parental figure during circumstances involving divorce, separation, custody, visitation, or child support. One of the resources you give in your book is the Center for Judicial Excellence.org, and I got on their website, and I don't know if it's probably always being updated, but they say that when I looked at it, the current statistic of children being killed was 821, and that's just absolutely heartbreaking.
Wow. And
this website is one of the resources in your book, and what can we do to help, besides that other organization, this horrible injustice? Any other ideas? Because, the more you listen to it, it's like we can't just sit back and not do anything about this.
Well, I think, one thing I'm eager for people to do is just to research more of these cases and publicize them. Like what happens with Carrie Green, the character in Custody, is that she finds evidence on these cases that where any reasonable person would realize these children were in tremendous danger. These weren't cases where like the abuser killed the children, but nobody saw it coming, like it came out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
These are cases where it was so obvious to any reasonable person, like these kids are in tremendous danger. You've got to take steps to protect them. And the court still refused to do anything to protect them. And by the way, all the facts that the journalist discovers about these other cases, those are all true stories with the real names right out of newspaper.
Yeah, I looked up some of those, and it's horrifying.
They're unbelievable. They're unbelievable. And that's obviously just the tip of the iceberg. Those are cases that I'm able to write about without significant fear of lawsuit because children were murdered. But you can do anything short of murder to a child, and it's very hard for journalists to write about it because they're afraid you're going to slap them with a libel suit.
Right.
And those stories really are extremely instructive. And I should just sort of quickly say on the side here that this book so far, the way we're talking about it sounds miserable. I know I'm emphasizing these painful aspects of it. That I wrote this book not so much for those of us who really get it. I wrote it hoping that it would get in the hands of people who don't get it, and just they would be reading it just because it's an entertaining mystery. And so I made it funny and I made it romantic. And so if you're like thinking of handing this book to like a friend or a relative, somebody you wish would understand the issue better, you can tell them like, you're going to, this is humorous and romantic and suspenseful. You're not going to want to put it down. You already commented on how it was hard to put down.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I read over half of it in the first setting. It was like a Sunday afternoon, and I'm like, I just couldn't put it down. Like, one more chapter.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear that, because that was really what I was hoping for, because I feel like if we just tell a book that tells all the horrors of what's going on in the child custody system, we're going to have trouble getting people to read it.
Right.
And so I was hoping to more like be able to sneak up on people with a suspenseful and entertaining book, but where they would by the end know about a bunch of real life. There is the fictional case that the novel's about, but the journalist finds all these true cases. And I am hoping that'll make people think, whoa, what's going on in this child custody system is a little different from how I thought it was.
Right.
Wow.
It is. It's giving. That's what it did for me. Is like I knew a little bit about it because I'd heard about some of these cases, but not. I definitely got educated as well as being entertained.
Right. That was a great idea. I think you were very successful with that.
I was really inspired by a book that's 100 times better. Although I think I did a fine job, but I was really inspired by The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And that's actually not one book; it's a trilogy. But
those now after you said that,
those are very powerful books that are full of messages about male violence against females. And I just recently wrote in a blog post. I don't know if you happen to see this, but the title of the first book, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, in Swedish was not The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The Swedish title of that book was Men Who Hate Women. And so Stieg Larsson, the author of that trilogy, he was on a mission. He really wanted people to understand a bunch of things about violence against women. And so he was really an inspiration to me, because I thought, well, here's someone with a kindred spirit. He cares about the same issue that I care so much about. And he figured out a way. He's unfortunately not alive anymore, but he figured out a way to make it in a story that people would want to read. And so I thought, you know what, I'll never be able to write anything that'll reach the number of people that The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo did, but I can reach some people by learning from his model. So he was a real inspiration to me.
Yeah, and the word will get out, and who knows, you might reach the same numbers.
We can always hope.
Yeah. This next question was very interesting to me. I want to hear your answer on this one. Sometimes children side with the abusive parent. What advice would you give to a parent that is dealing with that? I know your latest blog posts cover this topic, and I thought, didn't Gretchen Baskerville ask him? Did she ask this topic?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
and then you've got your latest 3 blog posts to talk about that too.
But I was curious, why do they side with the abusive parent?
So is the video with Gretchen already up?
Yeah, I watched it the other day.
Oh, good. There's a host of things, so I'll just choose a few things to highlight. But one is that it's scary living with an abuser. And I don't just necessarily mean scary that mom's going to get hurt or that you're going to get hurt physically, although kids worry about that a lot. They worry even more that mom's going to get hurt than worrying about themselves, but they worry about themselves also. But it's also about being emotionally afraid. Like, they're afraid of what kind of cruelty is going to happen to mom, and they're afraid of what kind of cruelty is going to happen to their siblings. They're not just afraid about physical injury, because the domestic abuser is so mean. And
Yeah.
and this is one of the things the public tends to misunderstand. They tend to think of the domestic abuser like his issue is just his violent, that he gets violent when he's mad. It's like, no, these are mean. These are individuals who are mean in relationships.
Yeah.
And chronically, over and over again in all different kinds of ways. They hurt. In fact, they do more psychological damage than they do physical damage to the women and children in the home.
Right.
And so kids are afraid in both senses of fear. And they're trying to figure out where a safe place is to stand. And if you're in good with the abuser, you're kind of in a safer position. And so that's one of the reasons why they side with the abuser, is just out of fear. Another reason why they side with the abuser is because he controls all the good stuff. Abuse is about the abuse of power. So the abuser has way more power than mom does. That's what you get. And so what freedoms you're going to get, what presents you're going to get, what video game console you're going to get, whether you can go here, whether you can go there, how much you have to do homework. I mean, all this stuff is controlled by the abuser. You're in good with him. You've got the goodies in life.
Right. Okay.
And so there's that whole factor. And then a lot of it is just outright indoctrination by the abuser, who is able to take advantage of the fact that he's traumatizing children to indoctrinate them. I mean, this is one of the sad ironies of how trauma works, is that when we are traumatized, we're more brainwashable. In fact, any serious system of brainwashing involves also traumatizing the individual. That's how it's done. And I'm not just talking about domestic violence. I'm talking about interrogation or any other kind of thing. You traumatize the individual because that's when you can really brainwash them. So unfortunately, abusers are able to take advantage of he's able to take advantage of the damage he himself has done to get kids onto his side. It's so sad that it works that way, but that's how it works. Here's a traumatized kid. Then he starts to brainwash the kid, tell the kid all kinds of lies about the mother, and he's talking to a traumatized kid. And you may think, well, why would you believe a father that you're terrified of or a stepfather that you're terrified of? But unfortunately, that's how trauma works. That's exactly who you're most likely to believe is the person that you're traumatized by.
Yeah, because they're in survival mode.
So there's a very heavy brainwashing load. So there's a lot of different factors, and there are a number of things that mom can try. There's no guarantee, but she can. The main thing she has to work on is to try to have the closest possible relationship with her kids that she can, and try to work on resolving conflicts. Try to work on communication. Try to be a better parent. Try to be a stronger communicator. Try to have more room for your children to be upset, and at the same time have less room for them to treat you disrespectfully. And that's a hard line to walk. So
It is.
You're going to have to be stricter than other parents about how your kids are allowed to talk to you, but you're going to have to make sure that your kids have room to express that they're upset with you, as long as they do it in decent, not demeaning ways.
Right.
Well, that's a tough skill for people to learn. And then she's going to have to tell them some things about what their father is like without making it sound like she's bad-mouthing him. Because if they don't realize some things about him, they're going to be more subject to his brainwashing. So I wrote this series of blogs where I put some of my ideas up about that. And then I wrote a book called When Dad Hurts Mom that one of you mentioned today.
Yeah.
And that book is just full of suggestions. It's like almost every chapter ends with a section called What Can I Do? So that's really where I've put the lion's share of my suggestions for moms, is in that book. And I always tell people, you don't have to buy a book. Nowadays, libraries will get you any book that's available. They'll have it for you within 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then I know you've emphasized teaching your kids critical thinking skills.
And I talk about that a bunch in When Dad Hurts Mom, a whole bunch of strategies for teaching kids to analyze. Yeah.
Yeah. And just knowing the dynamics of control and all of that.
I'll give you a quick thought about that, which is that we can't beat the abuser at the things that he's best at. Mm-hmm. And so if an abusive dad is saying, think like me, think like me, think like me, and mom is saying, no, think like me, think like me, think like me, the abuser is going to win, because controlling how children think, controlling how people think, is his absolute specialty. You're not going to beat him at his own game. So if he is saying, think like me, think like me, think like me, and mom is saying, think for yourself, think for yourself, think for yourself, that's a conflict she can win.
Yeah, that's very true.
But that means that she has to be prepared to have kids that are going to think for themselves, and that's a harder job for a parent. It's a more satisfying kind of parenting, but it's a tougher kind of parenting because you teach them to think critically. They're going to think critically about you. And I don't mean that you have to allow them to be rude. You shouldn't. They shouldn't be allowed to put you down. But they are going to start to point things out about you that you need to deal with. And I had to deal with this because I decided, for reasons unrelated to domestic violence, that I was going to raise critical thinking kids. And they would start to point things out about me that I would then have to deal with because they were right. You know? But in the long term, that's the game you can win, because he can't win that. He's not the one. He can't teach kids to think for themselves. He can't encourage kids to think for themselves. That's not how an abuser functions. So that's how you win. Is he says, think like me, think like me, think like me, and you say, think for yourself, think for yourself, think for yourself.
That is so good. That's been the hardest part, is having to, and the aftermath and the children. It's been very, very difficult, but what you just said it makes so much sense. And I do have to draw that line and that boundary where they were starting to be very critical of me, and they're getting so much better and not doing that.
Oh,
and
good.
Actually listening, and my oldest just complimented me and actually said that I did the best job I could. I sat there kind of shocked because they came to this critical point to now it's turning the corner. But
I'm trying to get women to write I've decided to create a section of my website for women's stories about ways that they rebuilt and strengthened their relationships with their kids, like how things finally started to go better. And people can write those with their real names, or they can write them anonymously. But I'd love to encourage you to be one of the people to tell a short version, 2, 3, 4-page version of how you got things to start to go in a better direction.
I will, but I'm going to listen to everything. I added all these podcasts, so I'm going to listen to everything you said and start implementing more of what you just said and work on this a little more. But I will once I see some more results. But it all is starting to turn a corner now.
That's so good to hear.
It might have been because we all just had COVID together, and so we spent a lot of time together, so getting better. And it wasn't a good thing, but we're all better now, so.
Yeah.
Virus imposed togetherness.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, the world's in a lot of that right now.
Yeah.
No kidding.
So in your book, you share a conversation. We talked about this a little bit. You referenced this with a reporter of the story and a child psychologist, talking about how the custody courts in the last 20 years have been heavily influenced by a theory of Richard Gardner, which you called parental alienation, and how this theory slams moms for even believing their children's disclosures. And this is very troubling and puzzling in logic. Anything else you'd want to expand about that? I know you already touched on that.
Well, the parental alienation theory allows you to dismiss any allegation of abuse and not bother to investigate, because you can just say, "Oh, this is the mom just out to destroy kids' relationship with their father." And the court is being completely hypocritical about its standards of evidence, because in order to decide, yes, there was domestic violence, or yes, there was child sexual abuse, the court is requiring a very high, in fact, I would say unreasonably high level of proof, much more than most people would need to be quite satisfied. But to decide that the mother is an alienator, it's requiring no proof at all. All the father has to do is say, this mom is really out to alienate me from the children, and it becomes a parental alienation case just because he raised the allegation. So it's like, how come these other allegations require tons of proof and that allegation requires no proof at all?
Yeah, they just take their word.
Yeah, it's for all the reasons I talked about earlier. It's because it's convenient. And the unfortunate people have really seized on this parental alienation thing. And what I will say is, can parents turn children against the other parent unfairly? Yes. Is it easy to do? No. It takes a really, really extended campaign to turn children against a loving. So if children have successfully been turned against a loving parent, any proper investigation would turn up evidence of a longstanding campaign to do that. The reason that they can't find evidence of that kind of campaign, usually in these cases, is because she did not run a campaign to turn them against their father. His behavior turned them against him.
Right.
Complete failure of the court to do its due diligence and look into, like, what's the evidence? Where's this campaign? These psychologists are starting to come up with these theories. This is an example of how the divorce profession is getting involved in this cash cow. The divorce profession has developed these theories that a parent can turn children against the other parent without even meaning to do that, through just sort of unconscious, subtle signals. No, you cannot. You cannot turn children against a loving parent through unconscious, subtle signals. It takes a train to get children to stop wanting to be with a loving, caring parent.
Okay. Yeah, the biggest surprise to me, I didn't realize this, that it was about money at the beginning on that first question. That to me was, it's sad. It's sad,
It
you know,
is
that
very
it's about
sad.
money, but that's how a lot of things are, unfortunately,
Right. Money breeds corruption sometimes.
in this world. Yeah. Your work in this book show the importance that as moms, we have to fight for the relationship with our kids. It is just so critical. You do have resources in your book and on your website. Anything you'd want to add to that?
Well, the kinds of conflicts that arise between the mom and the daughter in the novel, between Lauren Harbison and Brandy Harbison, are really typical of the kind of thing that goes on, where the child becomes very resentful at mom about things that dad is doing that mom has no control over because the court is not letting her protect the child. And so the kinds of tensions that arise that in that book are pretty typical of things that happen. And so my main message is that the whole society needs to pay much more attention to how abusers are not just damaging individuals, but they're damaging relationships. And that, in fact, the single way that abusers are doing the greatest psychological harm to children is by destroying their relationship with their mothers, or at least damaging their relationship with their mothers. And there's some evidence to suggest, research evidence to suggest that this is the way they are doing the single greatest amount of harm. Well, if that's already the way they're doing pretty much the greatest harm to kids, well, imagine how that's going to go after they split up, after the parents split up. Suddenly he's got the kids alone with him all the time. Now he's really going to go to town trying to damage their relationship with their mothers. So the court has managed to succeed in turning that 180 degrees into the opposite preoccupation about, mothers being out to destroy children's relationship with the abuser. It's like, no, he'll handle that fine by himself. He can destroy his own relationship with them just fine. He doesn't need her help. The opposite of what the serious problem is. The serious problem is abusers turning kids against their mothers. That's the problem. That's by far the most common one, and that's what's got to be addressed first.
Right. So critical. Yeah. So I heard you say there could be another book in this series, possibly 2 more books. Are they going to continue with the same characters, or going to be completely different characters?
No. Carrie Green is going to be our sort of detective, if you want to call her that. Her career as a journalist is going to be where we will be continuing through book 2, and as you were saying, yes, there's probably going to be a book 3. But yeah, we're going to be with Carrie.
Good. That's awesome.
Well, we just want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. Your work is invaluable. Where can our listeners find your latest book, and where are you on social media?
So In Custody, you can find it at Amazon, or you can find it at incustodythenovel.com. And then my website is just lundybancroft.com. That's where you find my blogs.
Yeah.
And I'm on Facebook just at Lundy Bancroft. So you find me in any of those spots.
Great. Oh, we so appreciate you taking the time to be on our podcast, because we really do. We want to say on behalf of even the Winged Hope that we were with last night, they wanted to make sure we told you thank you so much for your work.
Well, big greetings to all of your audience, and thanks a lot for having me part of this discussion. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was so great. Thank you so much.
Good luck to all of you. Take care.
Take
All
care.
right, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.